Big news coming out of Newcastle. PAF will not fully fund a new stadium. Number two, the club have injected over £100 million into the club recently. And number three, we'll talk about Man U doing a U-turn on their stadium plans. First, let's talk about news which broke in the Daily Mail yesterday. News coming out that PAF will not fully fund a rebuild of Newcastle Stadium. So it broke in the news yesterday that Newcastle's owners, which are PAF at 85% and the Reuben brothers at 15%, will not fully finance the bill of a rebuild of a new stadium or of increasing St James's Park's current capacity. The report says that any rebuild will be half funded by the owners and the rest of the funding will be leveraged against Newcastle as a loan. I think there's two possible ways to look at it. Let's look at the positive side first. The positive side is that this is completely normal. Tottenham did it on the rebuild of their stadium. They borrowed £637 million from Goldman Sachs, Bank of America and HSBC. And they used those funds to build their state-of-the-art stadium. Now it remains to be seen whether PAF and the Reuben brothers will fully fund the stadium, but then put half of the costs of the stadium back onto Newcastle's debt. I think a lot of Newcastle fans thought because PAF have very deep pockets, and those pockets are £900 billion deep, that any new stadium will be completely gifted to Newcastle. I think we need to remember what PIF stands for. It's Public Investment Fund. It's not Public Gift Fund. And I'm sure you and me understand that if we invest in something, we generally expect something in return. This might come as a little bit of a surprise to fans. We thought PIF were purely just going to build us a new stadium for free. That is generally not the case. Even Arsenal took out a £260 million loan when they built the Emirates. On the positive side, it sounds like they will be funding about half of the build and then the other half will go towards loans. Fans may also be worried because we know we've got PSR challenges, and if we're now taking out a huge bank loan, how is that going to affect our PSR? We must remember that expenditure on infrastructure does not count towards or affect the PSR balance sheet. However, the interest on any loans paid back does affect PSR. But on the positive side, even Bloomberg have reported that Newcastle are in talks with several private lenders, which could possibly help finance the other half of the deal. Now let's take a step back very quickly. We were all hoping and wondering whether news would come out this year. It was then reported that news is going to come out possibly at best at the early 2026. I think news coming out this week about the financing means that news is going to break very, very soon on a new stadium plan. Because if we're talking about the financing now, and that's currently in the news, that means that the wheels are in motion and things are starting to happen, which is great news for Newcastle because we all know we've been hamstrung by PSR issues over the last couple of years. And what impact can a new stadium have? Well, let's bring a graphic up here very quickly. If we look at matchday income of the 2023-2024 season, have a look at Man United's matchday income at £137 million. Newcastle are languishing down in 7th at that table at £50 million. That's less than half of Man United. If anyone was wondering why and how Man United were able to finance deals for Sesko and Buemo and Cunha, for example, just have a look at their matchday revenue. Newcastle are bringing in around £50 million a year at a 52,000-seater stadium. If we extrapolate those same conditions and numbers up and say Newcastle are at a 70,000-seater stadium, immediately our matchday revenue would go up to £67 million per year. But that could easily be north of £100 million a year if you include hospitality packages, for example. Let me bring up another graphic over here. If we look at Newcastle's matchday income over the last 20 odd years, you can see it's been hovering around the £25 million mark. Just have a look at the impact the pandemic had at our matchday income. We all know stadiums were empty. PAF took over in 2021, 2022, and that matchday income has shot up to £50 million, in particular because we've been in the Champions League in 2 of the last 3 seasons. Now give Newcastle a bigger house with more bums on seats, more hospitality, more concerts, more boxing, and all of that revenue and income comes straight into Newcastle and affects our PSR ceiling. It really feels like the wheels are in motion now, especially with Darren Eales leaving and David Hopkinson taking over as the club's new CEO. And I honestly think all the stars are aligning and pointing towards a new stadium in Leazes Park. Upgrading St James's Park to a 65,000-seater stadium just means that the juice is not worth the squeeze. Don't forget, St James's Park is a venue for Euro 2028. We will not be able to start any construction before that date, but that's still 3 years away. Work and consultation and planning needs to start as soon as possible. This talk about financing and structuring the deal in terms of how we could actually build a stadium is really positive news in terms of something happening sooner rather than later. If we do look back at what David Hopkinson said when he first joined Newcastle, he said where Scotiabank Arena is in Toronto, or where the Bernabeu is in Madrid, which is where he used to work, and his previous job was at Madison Square Garden, which is in the absolute heart of Manhattan. St James's Park is in the heart of Newcastle. Location matters. So the other big news which broke this week was that the Newcastle owners have injected a further £106.5 million into the club. On top of that, a further £5 million was injected into the Newcastle's women's team. This is the 9th time PAF have pumped money into the club, but it's the biggest amount since they bought the club in 2021. Don't forget, they bought the club for $350 million from Mike Ashley, but since they've bought the club, they've injected a further £462 million into the club. Now, the big question is why? What's this money for? Before anyone gets excited, it doesn't mean that Newcastle are going to go and sign a £100 million player in January. The thinking is that this money is going to help with the day-to-day running costs of the club. And that can include things like scout trips to watch potential players, or travel costs for the players traveling around Europe in the Champions League. It could count towards some of the upgrade into Newcastle's training ground, of which they've got planning permission for. But I don't think the owners are going to pour £100 million into the training ground where they clearly know that's not the long-term future of the club. If you want any more information on that, check out the video I've already done on that. What I think is that a large portion of this £100 million could go towards feasibility studies for the new stadium. In any construction project, generally 10 to 12% of the total fee goes towards professional fees. Those professional fees include architects, electrical consultants, mechanical consultants, project planning, communications, legal. And I personally know a lot about this because it's my day-to-day job. We've recently completed a project refurbishment, and I can promise you that consultants and professional fees can run into the millions. But the sheer size of this investment does feel significant and different. I personally do think something is massively in the pipeline here with the new funding. I don't think wages have gone up exponentially. It may be allocated towards giving some players new contracts. Please, Bruno Tonali, Tino Livramento, please. I think something is in the pipeline here on a bigger scale. Possibly the training ground, but certainly the stadium, because that's what's going to give the club and the owner something back in terms of revenue. Now, sticking on the topic of stadiums, Manchester United have announced they're ditching their canopy plan. As we know, earlier this year, Man United unveiled a new plan for a new Old Trafford. But those plans have hit a roadblock because talks between United and Freightliner, which is the company that owns much of the area to the west of the current ground, which had been earmarked for part of the new stadium footprint, have hit massive hurdles. That's because Freightliner are demanding upwards of £400 million for the land, and Man United thought they could get it for £50 million. Now, what the news is saying that the huge covering, which, let's be honest, looks like a circus tent, is going to be ditched completely. And the reason for that is partially because of these arguments with Freightliner? I don't think so. They're saying that this canopy was really just an aesthetic piece. It wasn't doing anything. But if you look at the video that United released about the stadium, and in Norman Foster's own words, this canopy was supposed to harvest solar energy and rainwater. Now let me know in the comments below what you think about this, but I personally think that this is a huge U-turn from United. I think it is completely unacceptable and embarrassing to release a video to saying you're going to be getting X and we're doing it for this reason, and the trident on the badge and the Holy Trinity, blah, blah, blah. Let's be honest, any sane person thinks that that is a glorified circus tent. In all honesty, they've realized they've messed this one up, and they're making a massive U-turn and saying now we're going to go for something a little bit more traditional. So how is Man United's canopy tent U-turn relevant to Newcastle Stadium news? Well, what it shows to you is that before you release any sort of concept design out to the open public, you need to canvass certain public opinion first. That might be through certain fan forums, but you cannot release conceptual design saying this is what we're going to be building and this is the reason why, and then lie about it and saying, oh, we're not going to do it for reasons X, Y, Z. Newcastle, please do take notes. And before you release any plans, please make sure you do a 360 check with the right people. So make sure we're not in the same position. So that wraps up another video from me. Exciting news about money being invested into the club. Some interesting news about PAF not going to be fully funding the stadium. And obviously United's Canopy tent U-turn. If you like what you hear, please do give us a like and subscribe. And don't forget,